The nameplate was gone. No one remembered who removed it. At some point in the last 300 years, someone had quietly taken it down, and no one had asked questions, and the empty chair had simply remained. A gap in the long, curved row of council seats, like a missing tooth that everyone had learned not to look at directly. Sophie had looked at it on her first day as a junior Voakai delegate. She had asked her senior advisor what species that seat belonged to. The advisor had said, "No one," and moved on so quickly that Sophie had understood without being told that the question was not welcome. That was 4 years ago. Today she was looking at it again. The chamber was in the middle of a water rights dispute between two Drenathi colonies when the alert came in. Not an alarm. The Galactic Council did not use alarms for incoming signals, because alarms implied urgency, and urgency implied that something could surprise them. It was a soft chime, the kind used for routine incoming transmissions. The Council's communication officer, a thin-limbed Passari named Orin, received the signal at his station. He looked at his screen. He looked at it again. Then he did something Sophie had never seen a Passari do in a professional setting. He went very still. Passari were not a still species. They had 6 limbs and used at least 4 of them constantly. Orin used none of them. He sat frozen at his station for nearly 10 seconds before he turned to the chamber floor and said, in a voice carefully designed to carry no particular tone, "I have an incoming signal on the legacy frequency." The Drenathi delegates stopped arguing. The senior council chair, a broad-bodied Yulani named Chair Moten, looked up from her notes. "Which legacy frequency?" Orin said the number. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then old Ron, who sat in the back row as he always did, who was so old that his scales had gone from green to pale gray, and his movements had slowed to something that looked almost like patience, old Ron made a sound. Not a word, just a low sound, somewhere between recognition and something harder to name. Sophie leaned over to the delegate beside her, a young Drenathi named Farl, and whispered, "What frequency is that?" Farl looked at her. His expression was difficult to read. "It is the frequency registered to Earth," he said, "the human frequency." Sophie had heard the word human. She had read the basic historical entries. She knew they were a species that had once held a council seat, and then, the records were vague here, had ceased to be present. She had assumed they were extinct. Most younger delegates assumed this. The older ones never corrected the assumption out loud. Chair Moten said, "Can you confirm the source?" Orin's limbs had started moving again, working quickly across his station. "Confirmed. The signal origin is consistent with a vessel traveling from the outer rim. It is not a distress signal. It is formatted as a standard first contact greeting." He paused. "They are using the original registration codes. The codes have not been used in 287 years. They are still valid." Someone near the front of the chamber said, too loudly, "We should jam it." Chair Moten did not respond to this. She looked instead at Ron. In matters of historical complexity, the chamber deferred to Ron not because he held any formal authority, but because he had been alive long enough to have personal memory of things others only knew from records. Ron's pale gray eyes moved slowly across the chamber. He said, "You will not jam it." He said it the way one states a fact about weather, not a command, just information about how things are. "And why not?" said the delegate who had spoken before. He was a Primarch representative named Sullivan, and he said it with the particular confidence of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of the right things. Ron looked at him. Because the last time someone tried to prevent humans from reaching a destination they had decided to reach, that someone had a very unpleasant few years afterward. He settled back. "Answer the signal, Orin." Orin opened the channel. The voice that came through was clear. No static, no delay. The vessel was closer than the outer rim designation had implied, had been traveling for some time, already well inside the approach corridor. The voice was calm. It said, This is the vessel Resolute, registered to the Human Commonwealth. We are transmitting on our original Council frequency to request permission to enter Council-recognized space. We are aware our registration has been inactive. We are aware our seat is still technically valid. We would like to discuss both in person, if the Council is willing. A pause, then. We are not in a hurry, but we would like an answer before we reach the station as a courtesy. The chamber did not erupt the way Sophie expected it to. It went quiet instead, a different and more serious kind of reaction. Quiet meant people were thinking rather than reacting. Quiet meant they did not know what to do. Chair Moten looked at the empty seat. The faint symbol on the back of it, a blue-green circle, small white shapes across it, caught the light in a way Sophie had not noticed before. Moten said, "Open a return channel. Tell them they have permission to enter." She said it before anyone could object, and she said it with the kind of firmness that closes a subject. Sophie stared at the empty chair. Something in the room had changed. The chair was still vacant, but it no longer felt unclaimed. It felt like it was waiting. Ron left the chamber during the recess and walked the long corridor to the archive hall alone. Most council members treated the archive hall as ceremonial, a place you visited when a new species joined, when a species was formally declared extinct, when treaties needed to be witnessed and stored. The lights inside were dim, and the air was kept cold for the sake of the older data systems. Very few delegates spent time here voluntarily. Ron had spent a great deal of time here. He moved to the section he wanted without needing to check the index. He had come here often enough that his feet knew the way. He found the shelf he was looking for, pressed the retrieval panel, and waited while the relevant records transferred to the reading terminal. The first file he opened was the original Earth registration document. The language was old but not difficult. The humans had filled it out with unusual thoroughness. Most species submitted the minimum required information, but the humans had included attachments, detailed atmospheric data, a complete list of native predator species, geological survey results showing an unusually active tectonic environment, historical documents from their own civilization going back several thousand years. The Galactic Standard Form had a section for listing the primary threats to survival on the registering species' home world. Most species listed 2 or 3. The humans had listed 19. He moved through the next records quickly. The early years of Human Council membership had been chaotic. They asked too many questions. They formed opinions faster than was comfortable. They kept proposing resolutions about things other species had decided to quietly ignore. A plague on a small colony world, one that other species had assessed as not cost-effective to address, became a human priority within weeks of them joining. They showed up with medicine and engineers, and an attitude that could not be described as diplomatic, but also could not be described as aggressive. It was closer to insistent. The plague was contained. The colony survived. The pattern repeated. A water purification failure on a desert world. A territorial conflict between two species that had been grinding at each other for so long that both sides had forgotten the original dispute. A third species whose communication system was incompatible with standard galactic translators and who had been functionally voiceless in the Council for 40 years. The humans fixed the translator problem in 8 months. They called it embarrassing that it had taken so long. They said this directly to the Council, with no apparent awareness that saying so was considered impolite. Ron pulled up the testimonial records, entries made by non-human species who had interacted with humans directly. He had read most of them. He opened one he remembered particularly well, written by a Drenathi elder who had worked alongside a human delegation during a refugee crisis 400 years ago. The elder had written, "They do not keep their sadness in a separate place from their work. When they see suffering, they carry it visibly. I thought at first this was a weakness. I came to understand it was how they decided what mattered. They could not distance themselves from a problem the way we learned to, so they solved it instead. Ron closed that file. He opened the one he had been avoiding. The Marath vote. It had been a long time coming. The Primarch Accord, a coalition of resource-heavy species with deep influence on the Council, had been quietly reclassifying the Marath for years. Small bureaucratic steps, each one technically legal, a change in the census category, a revision to the sentience assessment criteria, a procedural delay on every Marath petition for the past 20 years. When the final resolution came to a full vote, the humans had already filed 4 formal objections. They had submitted biological and behavioral studies from 3 independent researchers confirming Marath sentience. They had brought a Marath representative, a young female named Sessa, to the chamber gallery, which was technically permitted but had never been done before. The resolution passed anyway, 12-9. The humans cast their vote against it clearly and loudly. Sessa sat in the gallery with her hands folded and her eyes straight ahead. After the vote, the human delegation requested a recess. During the recess, they sent a single formal communication to the council chair. It said that the human commonwealth could not in good conscience remain a participating member of a body that had voted to strip personhood from a living species, and that they were withdrawing their delegation pending a review that they acknowledged might never happen. Then they left. Not just the chamber, not just the station. Over the next 5 years, every registered human vessel, colony, and citizen quietly left galactic-recognized space. No dramatic announcement, no threats. They simply went. Ron had been much younger then. He remembered the relief that had spread through certain parts of the council, quiet, unspoken, but real. The humans had made everyone uncomfortable. Their absence was easier. He had never felt the relief himself. He thought about the voice on the Resolute's channel, calm, unhurried. We are aware our seat is still technically valid. 300 years, and they came back saying technically valid as though they had only stepped out for a short while and were checking whether their chair had been given away. Ron walked back toward the chamber. He suspected the chair had not been given away because some part of the council, even the parts that had been relieved, had always known the humans might return, and had wanted, for reasons no one stated out loud, to leave the door open. The Resolute did not look like a warship. That was the first thing Verk noticed, and it bothered him more than if it had. He had prepared himself, on the long transit to the rendezvous point, for something imposing, something that matched the weight of the histories he had skimmed on the way over, the old records about humans and their death-world biology and their stubborn presence in galactic politics before they vanished. He had expected sharp angles and weapon ports and a hull designed to communicate threat. Instead, the Resolute looked purposeful in a way that was harder to read. It was large but not aggressive. Its exterior carried equipment arrays that Verk's analyst could not categorize, not weapons, not standard sensors. The hull had the worn smooth texture of a vessel that had traveled far without stopping much. Verk's analyst, a young Drenathi named Roshi, kept cycling through the scan results with a confused expression. "It is carrying agricultural fabrication units," she said, "and a full-scale medical bay, and what looks like a terraforming seed library." She paused. "And weapons, those I can identify, but they are not pointed at anything." "Weapons that are not pointed at anything," Verk said. "Correct, they appear to be in a stored configuration, accessible but not active." Verk thought about this. A vessel that could heal a planet and hurt one, both at the same time, and had chosen to arrive with the healing equipment more visible. He filed this information carefully and decided not to decide what it meant yet. The Resolute opened a docking channel without being asked. A voice, the same calm voice from the initial transmission, said that one representative would come aboard, unarmed, and that the rest of the crew would remain on the vessel until invited. It said this as a statement, not a request, but it did not feel like a threat. It felt like someone explaining how they preferred to do things and expecting that preference to be respected. Verk granted the dock. The human who came through the airlock was named Dara. Dara was shorter than him, with dark skin and close-cut hair. Her eyes moved around the docking bay with open curiosity, not wariness. She carried a data folio under one arm the way someone carries something they expect to use soon. She looked at Verk and the two council liaisons and said, "Thank you for meeting us," simply, without ceremony, and waited. Verk said, "We have been asked to escort your vessel to the station and facilitate a preliminary discussion before any formal session." Dara nodded. "That works." They moved to the meeting room. Dara sat down and placed her data folio on the table and folded her hands on top of it. She did not open it yet. She looked around the room once at the walls, the lighting fixtures, the ventilation grills with that same open curiosity. Then she looked at Verk. "How much do you know about why we left?" she asked. Verk said, "The Marath vote." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "We could not stay after that. Not because we lost the vote, votes are lost, because of what the vote meant. The council decided that a living, thinking species was not a person, and then moved forward as though that decision was just a policy matter." She did not say this with heat. She said it with the flat weight of someone describing something they have thought about for a long time. "We could not be part of that without becoming part of it." One of the council liaisons, a Passari named Fenn, said carefully, "The Marath situation was addressed in later sessions. Several resolutions were passed expressing regret." Dara said, "Yes, we read them." She did not continue the thought. She did not need to. Fenn stopped talking. Verk said, "You mentioned in your initial transmission that you wanted to discuss your seat, and something else." "Yes." Dara opened the data folio and slid a data chip across the table. "There is a resolution currently moving through the council's administrative track. It has not been formally introduced yet. It has been built through a series of procedural adjustments, census revisions, updated criteria for participant status, changes to resource access protocols. Each step is small. Taken together, they reclassify 3 species as non-participating observers with no vote and no protection rights." She let that sit for a moment. "We have been watching the council since we left," she continued. "Not to interfere, to understand. We came back now because this is the point at which watching becomes the same thing as agreeing." The room was quiet. Outside, through the narrow viewport, the Resolute sat steady at its dock. None of its weapons were active. All of its medical equipment was. Verk picked up the data chip. He did not look at it. He looked at Dara. "You have been watching for 300 years, he said. "Yes." "From where?" For the first time, something that was almost a smile moved across her face. "Everywhere," she said. "We have been busy." Verk set the chip down. He thought about the vessel's hull worn smooth by long travel, the seed library, the medical bay, the weapons in their stored configuration, accessible but not aimed. He thought about a species that had spent 3 centuries working quietly at the edges of the galaxy, and had come back not to reclaim power, but to put something on the record before it was too late to matter. He was not sure yet whether that made him feel better or worse. He suspected it did both at once. While Verk sat with the council liaisons and reviewed the data chip Dara had brought, his engineer Pilo found a reason to be near the docking connector. He told himself it was a routine systems check. He ran the check, then he stayed. One of the human crew members had come to the connector threshold to do the same, checking the seal integrity on their side, or something close to it. She was a human woman with light brown hair pulled back and a jacket with too many pockets. She noticed Pilo watching and did not seem bothered by it. "You can come closer," she said through the connector calm. "We do not bite. That is a human expression meaning we are not dangerous in this context." Pilo said, "I know the expression. We have translations." "Good." She went back to her checks. After a moment she said, "What is your name?" Pilo, I am Sana. She finished her check and leaned against the connector frame. You look like you have questions. Pilo had many questions. He was not sure which one to ask first. He said, "Where have you been all this time?" Sana thought about this. "Everywhere that needed something," she said. "There is a colony world in the Verath cluster, small, maybe 8,000 people. Their water processing system had been failing for 60 years. No one had gotten around to fixing it because it is not on any trade route. We spent 2 years there." She said this without particular pride, the way someone describes work they did. "There is a species called the Orenvel, not your Passari Oren, different name. They had lost most of their written language in a solar event. We helped them reconstruct it. That took 11 years. Pilo stared at her. 11 years on a language project. "Languages matter," Sana said. "Lose enough of yours and you start to lose who you are." She shrugged. "Humans know that. We almost lost our own languages a few times on Earth. It leaves a particular kind of sensitivity." Pilo thought about the data on the Resolute that Roshi had scanned, the seed library, the medical systems, the terraforming equipment. He had assumed it was a supply vessel. He was beginning to understand it was something more like a mobile problem-solving operation, a civilization contained in a hull, moving from need to need. "Did you ever want to come back?" he asked. "To the council, to any of this?" Sana was quiet for a moment. "We watched," she said. "There was a period about 150 years ago when it looked like the council might address some of what had gone wrong. There were some good species in good positions. We thought it might fix itself." She picked at something on her jacket sleeve. "It did not fix itself. And now? Now there is something that will not fix itself unless someone names it in front of everyone." She looked at him. "That is what Dara does. She names things." Pilo had heard parts of the meeting through the station's open comm channels, not the details but the tone of it. The data chip. The 3 species at risk. He said, "Are you afraid of how the council will respond?" Sana seemed to find this question interesting rather than obvious. She tilted her head. "Of the council? No, we have been in harder rooms." She paused. "We are always a little afraid we will be too late. That is different." On Verk's side of the station, the meeting had ended. He emerged from the corridor looking like someone who had been given a great deal of information and had not yet decided where to put it. Pilo fell into step beside him. Verk did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "They have documentation on the resolution going back 4 years, pre-draft communications, internal memos from the Primarch Accord. They have been tracking this for longer than most council members knew it existed." Pilo said, "Sana told me they spent 11 years helping a species reconstruct a lost language." Verk stopped walking. He looked at Pilo. 11 years. "Yes." Verk started walking again. He said nothing else for the rest of the corridor. But Pilo noticed that when they reached Verk's office, he did not go inside immediately. He stood in the doorway and looked out the viewport at the Resolute, still docked and steady, its hull worn smooth from long traveling. He stood there long enough that Pilo eventually left him to it. That evening, Roshi came to Pilo with something she had found during the deeper scan of the Resolute's external equipment. The arrays Verk's team had been unable to categorize. They were not weapons or sensors in any standard configuration. They were a new type of long-range receiver, designed to pick up signals from worlds that did not have the power to broadcast loudly. Worlds that were too small or too damaged to reach the council on their own. The Resolute had been listening, all this time, moving through the outer spaces, picking up the quiet calls of places no one else was close enough or willing enough to hear. Pilo sat with this information for a long time. He thought about how the galaxy had exhaled when the humans left, how easy it had been, apparently, to stop listening once they were gone. He thought about a species that had spent 300 years making itself into an ear for the voiceless, and then came back not to be thanked for it, but to make sure the same thing that drove them out did not happen again. He did not sleep well that night. He was not sure he was supposed to. Word had spread before anyone could stop it. By the time the full council session was called, the chamber gallery was fuller than it had been in decades. Species who sent proxies on most days had sent their actual delegates. Several observer species who held no vote had requested gallery access, which was technically permitted but rarely used. The seats were full. The aisles had people standing in them. Sylvie had arrived early and still barely found her seat. She watched Sullivan, the Primarch Accord's lead delegate, moving through the chamber with the tight expression of someone who had tried and failed to have the session delayed. He had filed 3 procedural motions that morning. All 3 had been denied. Ron had reviewed each one personally and found, each time, no valid grounds. Sullivan caught Sylvie watching him and gave her a look that she chose to interpret as a warning directed at someone else. Then Dara walked in. She came through the main delegate entrance, wearing the same clothes from the meeting with Verk, nothing formal. She walked to the human seat and sat down. The seat's identification panel lit up for the first time in generations. A few people in the gallery made sounds, not dramatic sounds, the kind that come out of a person involuntarily before they can decide to stay quiet. Chair Moten called the session to order. Sullivan did not wait for the formal agenda to be completed. He rose and said that the human delegation's presence was procedurally irregular, that their membership had effectively lapsed through centuries of non-participation, and that the council should formally vote on whether to recognize their seat before allowing any human delegate to speak. Ron said without standing, "The charter does not allow for lapse of membership through absence. It allows for removal by 2/3 vote of expulsion. No such vote has ever been filed. The seat is valid. The delegate may speak when recognized." He said it in the same tone he had used to say everything for the past 400 years. Flat and complete, like a door that has already been closed. Sullivan sat down. He did not look satisfied. He looked like someone recalculating. Chair Moten recognized Dara. Dara stood. She did not use notes. She looked around the chamber once, not performing, just looking, the way she had looked at the docking bay walls, with that particular human attention that made people feel she was actually seeing them. She said, 3 species are currently being reclassified through the Council's administrative track. They are the Veth, the Orem, and the Salo. Most of you have not heard these names recently. That is not an accident. She named the procedural steps, the census revisions, the updated criteria that had quietly narrowed the definition of participant status over the last 4 years. She named the dates. She named the Primarch Accord members who had authored each step. She put the evidence on the shared council display, file by file, so that every delegate in the room could see it at the same time. No one interrupted her. Even Sullivan did not interrupt her. When she was done presenting the evidence, she said, "I am not asking the council to do something dramatic. I am asking it to vote no on a resolution that has not yet been formally introduced, so that it cannot be introduced quietly later. I am asking for a vote on the record." She paused. "That is all." Sullivan rose the moment she sat down. He said the humans had no right to present unverified material. He said Dara's presence was a destabilizing influence. He said that a species which had abandoned the council had forfeited any claim to speak on its processes. He said several more things, each one slightly louder than the last. Dara watched him from her seat. She did not react. She sat with her hands on the table and listened to all of it with an expression that Sylvie could only describe as patient. Not the patience of someone holding their temper. The patience of someone who has heard this argument before in various forms and has already decided it does not change anything. When Sullivan finished, Dara said one more thing. She said, "We left because we disagreed and we were not willing to make our presence a sign of agreement. We came back for the same reason we always came, because someone needs help and we are able to give it. That is not destabilizing. It is the only reason we ever showed up at all. The vote on the resolution, now formally named and introduced. Because Sullivan had effectively introduced it himself by defending it, took place 90 minutes later. It failed 11-10. One vote. In the gallery, a Veth observer, young, with pale gray marking stripes along their neck, made a sound that Sophie had not heard in the council chamber before. She did not have a translation for it, but she understood it. Sullivan did not leave immediately. He stood at his station with the tight expression gone, replaced by something flatter and harder. He looked at Dara across the chamber floor. Dara looked back. No anger, no victory, just steadiness, the kind that does not move. Sophie watched this exchange and thought, this is not over. Sullivan would not stop. The Primarch Accord would find other approaches. The one-vote margin meant that 11 members had been willing to support the reclassification, and most of them were still sitting in their chairs. But the names were on the record now. The Veth, the Orem, and the Salo had been named as persons in open session, harder to undo than a quiet administrative revision. The human seat was lit. The door, it turned out, had been left open for a reason. The station was quieter after the session. Not peaceful, quieter in the way a room is quiet after a long argument, when everyone has gone home but the words are still in the walls. Ron found Dara in the observation deck. She was standing at the long viewport, looking out at the spread of stars beyond the station. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. She did not turn when he entered, but she said, "I thought you might come here," which suggested she had heard his slow footsteps in the corridor. Ron moved to stand beside her. Outside, the Resolute was visible at its dock, lit softly against the dark. Ron said, "Was it difficult, the time away?" Dara was quiet for a moment. "Yes and no," she said. "The work was not difficult. There was always work. A colony that needed a water system, a species that needed a translator, a world that had been quietly dying for decades because it was not interesting enough for anyone to notice." She watched the stars. What was difficult was knowing the council was here, making decisions, and that some of those decisions were going the wrong way, and we had chosen not to be inside it. "You could not stay," Ron said, "after the Marath vote." "No," she did not explain further. She did not need to. "We thought about coming back earlier. There was a period, maybe 100 years ago, when it seemed like things might shift on their own. They did not." She paused. "You cannot watch forever. At some point, watching is just another word for permission." Ron considered this. He said, "Many species were relieved when you left. I think you know that." "We know. They found you uncomfortable." "I know that too." She said it without bitterness. "We find certain things uncomfortable ourselves. We have learned to sit with it." Ron looked out at the Resolute, the worn hull, the equipment arrays pointing outward, not at the council station, not at anything threatening, just open and listening. He said, "You built a receiver to hear the small worlds." Dara glanced at him. "Your engineer scanned us thoroughly." "He is thorough, yes." Ron folded his hands. "The council has no such system. We hear what is loud enough to reach us." "We noticed," she said. And there was something in those two words, not an accusation, just a fact delivered with the particular weight of something that had been noticed for a long time from very far away. They stood in silence for a while longer. Then Ron said, "The vote was 11-10. Sullivan still has support. This will not be the last attempt." "I know," Dara said. "We are not leaving." Ron nodded slowly. He had assumed as much, but it was good to hear it stated. On the other side of the station, Pilo found Verk in his office with the lights dimmed, and a cup of something cold and forgotten on the desk. Verk was looking at the viewport with the expression of a person working through a long and complicated thought. Pilo said, "Roshi found something in the long-range logs of the Resolute. Records of signals they received and responded to over the past 3 centuries. There are 412 entries." Verk said nothing. 412 worlds, Pilo said. Species and colonies that sent a signal too small to reach the council. The Resolute received them, went to them, 412 times. Verk picked up the cold cup, looked at it, set it down. How many of those worlds are registered with the council? 61, Pilo said. The rest do not appear in our records at all. Verk sat with that number. The gap between 61 and 412 was not a small gap. It was the gap between what the council knew about and what actually existed. He said, the council did not know they were there. No. And the humans found them anyway. Yes. Verk stood up. He went to the viewport. Outside, the Resolute sat quiet and still, the way things sit when they have done a great deal of work and are simply resting between one task and the next. He thought about the session. Dara at the human seat, no notes, nomming species and dates and memos, putting things on the record someone had worked hard to keep off it. 11 to 10. He thought about 412 entries in a log that no one in the council had known existed. He thought about a species that had left in grief, spent 3 centuries doing the work the galaxy had not been doing, and came back not for recognition, but because the same rot was growing again and they could not watch it happen. He said, I want access to that log, all 412 entries. Pilo said, I thought you might. I already asked Sana, she said yes. You asked her, Verk said. We have been talking, Pilo said simply. She is interesting. The whole crew is interesting. They are not what I expected. What did you expect? Pilo thought about it. Something harder, he said. Something angrier after everything. He paused. They are not angry, they are just present, like they decided what matters and spend all their time on that. Verk looked back at the Resolute. In the observation deck, Dara was still at the viewport. She stayed there for a long time, not thinking about the session or Solvin or the work ahead. Just standing with the dark and the light and the knowledge that tomorrow there would be another session, and the seat would be lit, and someone would be in it. That was enough. That had always been enough.